Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome to episode 7 of Ask a Speechy, where we invite professional, expert, and successful people to talk about dyslexia. And it's quite simple. You can go on our website, submit your questions, and we will put them to our next guest. So if you haven't done so yet, you can go on our website at dystech.com.au/askaspeechy, submit your question, and we will put them to our next guest in the next episode. So today's guest is amazing. We have Cigdem. She is the founder of Simple Words book. She is a passionate advocate for dyslexia and neurodiversity. She had created an online dyslexia summit series as a free resources for supporting parents and educators. So I recommend you guys check this out at the end. Her mission is to improve fluency, comprehension, and more importantly, reading confidence for struggling reader. She also believed that every child loves to read. Thank you so much for being here. How are you, Cigdem?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm great.
Great, great, great. How's life in the US for you?
As we're quarantining as much as we can, so it's a different
Yeah,
year this year, but it helps me write my book, so can't
yeah,
complain.
absolutely. Absolutely. So you've got an amazing story. You have a son with
Mhm.
learning difficulties, is that right?
Yes.
And you decided to take the matter in your own hand by writing decodable book for him, and it turns out to become now a business, and you're helping people around the world with your book, and that's such an inspiring story. But so maybe you can start by maybe telling us a little bit about what are
Mhm.
decodable books.
Sure, certainly. So there's a different use of decodable words or decodable books, but I want to explain what my definition is. So when a text is decodable, that means the reader has learned the rules of the language. In this case, it would be English, on how to read the words on that in that text without issues. So if you look at the English language, majority of the words are decodable, but
Mm,
for a dyslexic reader, especially early on, because they don't know the rules, it's very difficult for them to read what their peers are reading. So, for example,
mm,
if you look at the silent E, um, if you're a student who learns just by osmosis, like schools teach in the US, then you can read the magic E sounds. It will be like bake, cake, time. But if you're a dyslexic child, then if you are learning an OG system or Wilson, whatever system that you are learning, you're using to learn the language and how to read it, then you would have to wait until those rules are taught. So what
mm.
we have seen and with the books in the market is they use a mixture of these words which might be frequently used, but they're still taught later in their program or their intervention. So what I call
Right.
quotable books for my books are, I use the rules that are taught early on, and when kids are reading the books, because they're taught these words and the rules how to read them early on, they are decodable and they're not frustrating to them.
Mm, mm. That's interesting. So in some way, it's a there are book that would sort of are written in a way that would enable potential struggling reader to easily
Mhm,
sort of decode the word, decode the story.
mhm.
And so, how is that helping them? Is this actually sort of train them to slowly but surely be better at reading? And is that the outcome? If you have a struggling reader and you support them with decodable book, what's the outcome of this? Are they better reader? Are they learning to read faster? What would be the outcome?
So a typical reader would start with very small books that are 200 words that says cat sat on a mat, the frog jumped off the log type of word,
Yeah.
and then that they would be practicing it. And the next they would jump into more phonics food. They would be 32 pages, about maybe 1,000 words, maybe 800 words, And then they would jump into chapter books, which would be 4,000 to 10,000 words. It would be more like those, fairy series, magic treehouse like books. And then afterwards, it's, pretty much every book that they can get their hands on, they can read. So with the decodable books, because they're about like 4,000 to 9,000 words, they can read them at an earlier level in their program. But because they're longer text, they can actually have a story. And most of the dyslexic children are pretty intelligent and they are really curious, they're artistic. So it's important for them to be fed with the information and the love of learning and love of reading. So it's very hard for them to say, I like books, I like to read, when they can't, because it's frustrating. And the connection they make early on is, I don't like to read, which really isn't true. It's because they can't read, they don't want to read. So so when they're learning the rules, it's important to practice, right? I always say it's like going to the gym. You can't go to the gym and start lifting really heavy weights. You have to start slowly and build your muscles. And automaticity has to come. So if they're not practicing, then they start reading word by word. Fluency means that they actually have automaticity, which means they recognize the word and they can decode it faster. And that's critical for reading comprehension. Because if you're reading a long sentence and you're reading word by word, when you come to the end, you forgot the earlier words and comprehension becomes more difficult. And for me, the most important part of reading is comprehension. If we're reading and we're not comprehending what we're reading, then reading has no value.
Yeah, I really like the analogy that you've made about the gym. You can't start by lifting heavy weight. You have to start, gently and slowly, and you progress. It's interesting because so I don't read now. I mean, I have to read email and a bit of news and things like this, but I don't particularly read. But when I was young, I remember, I think maybe for a period of maybe a year, I used to read book, tiny horror story book, and I quite enjoyed it. And I think that was the only period of my life where I actually enjoyed reading. And then after, I just got I don't know what happened, but yeah, I think I agree that children, anyone could find some piece of joy into reading something, right?
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that those decodable book are the key, or part of the solution to facilitate this pathway to sort of being able to enjoy reading. And so when does this start? So when can we actually have, or children start using this tool, using those decodable book? At which age will that start? Do you I mean, because obviously we are lifelong learner, but learning how to read extremely early is fundamental, and so knowing at what age a parent can start using those book would be great to know, because you have all sorts of parents in different situations who struggle. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what to do. So what age can we actually start?
So it depends on the level of the decodable book. So if you look at the Bob books, or the ones that have like cat sat on a mat, they really start at kindergarten level, right? But it's the progression, I think, that's important. So they read that, and then for dyslexic kids, there's almost nothing until they learn the rules, which could be up to 2-3 years, depending on how soon they're diagnosed, when the intervention starts. So my books have two different levels. One is the early decodable level, where I only use short vowels and some initial blends and some final blends. No two vowels come together, and they're relatively easy to decode. I use a lot of CVC words, which means like cat, mat, like C meaning the consonant, and V meaning the vowel. And as the reader starts to master the easier books, then the next level should come, and then the next level. So it should be a progression. Unfortunately, because I haven't found the books when my son was younger, I felt like after those really babyish books, there was nothing for him for another 2.5 years until he mastered the magic E, which is like silent E, and a few other rules. The control R is another one, but it really comes really, really later in there in the language training. So they can start as early as they're ready. And I was thinking my books would be mostly used by students grades 2 to 5.
Mm.
And I realized really early on, as my son was going into second grade, is the student can be in second grade, but it doesn't mean that they're reading at second grade. So I quickly dropped saying it's for grades, this and that, but I'm actually saying reading level. And what I have seen, which was surprising to me, was there are high school students who are still reading at maybe second to fourth grade level, and they're also reading my books as well. So I try to write stories that are engaging for elementary school kids, but also I have some books that are a lot more fantasy, a lot more intricate things are going on, metaphors are being used. There's a progression in the series from book to book, and they're more attractive to older students as well, because as one mom told me, it's insulting to give these kids these baby books when they get so much older. And I love that. That's just because those books aren't there doesn't mean that they shouldn't be reading. So as I said, then let's publish these, and that's how the really simple words book started.
That's so true. It made me think of something we've discussed a lot. We've during other episode is the stigma. Like when you're a grown up adolescent, you don't want to be reading like childish images and childish book, and it needs to appear as just a normal book that work for you. And yeah, that's a great point. And so the question is, do we need to have prior training to have the child read those books? Is there a method that we need to follow as an administrator or as a parent or as a teacher to have the child read the book? Or is it just as simple as, hey, look at this book, try and read it when you have the time, and that can do all of this by itself? Or is there actually a training that we need, or does anyone can just go ahead and administer a book for a child or a student?
So that's an excellent question. I'm not a certified teacher. I'm not certified in any special education, but what I have seen as an advocate and as a parent, and I have been to a few conferences, and I would say one thing that was always stuck with me that was mentioned in a conference panel was that they said 50% of the kids learn to read by osmosis. And they said you take a kid, you rub the book, and they just start reading it. And it's half the class. So they just kind of pick it up as you show, you read along with them, and they see how the sounds and the letters work, and they can start reading like that on their own. And that's my older daughter. I don't remember when she learned how we taught her. She just started reading. But then there's other 50%, and they said about 30% of that 50%, they need some guidance. They're slower, and once you open the door and you start showing them phonics, they are able to figure things on their own and start reading. And there's this 20% who are the dyslexics, or they have learning differences. They have to be taught explicitly. And they have to follow a certain methodology. And the most commonly used approach is OG approach, which is Orton-Gilligan approach in the US. And there are many different programs that come out of it, but there's a methodology to it. And they learn rule by rule how to read in English. And if they're not taught that way, they will never learn to a point where they're sufficient and just fluent readers.
So can you tell me a bit more about this osmosis technique of
Mhm.
teaching how to read for the people. I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with it. So can you explain a bit more what this osmosis technique is?
So they say you expose the kids to words, well, like using flashcards, right? A dyslexic child will not learn using a flashcard. Their working memory will absorb it, and then tomorrow, in a week later, they won't remember it. And
Hmm.
and you can just put your finger and say, this is how you pronounce this word, like this is cat, this is mat. A lot of the kids who learn by osmosis, they internalize that information and they're able to read. I don't know too much about how it is because for us as parents, it just kind of happened with my daughter, and it was just she was able to read. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how most schools teach. They use flashcards. They have these word banks. Or my son had a keychain with a lot of words, and every week he had to learn 10, 20 words, and he had to memorize them. And there was a quiz at the end of the week on Fridays on how to spell the words. And
Hmm.
but because he wasn't taught the rules behind it and what happens when
Yes.
like a vowel comes after this or that, or when a R comes after a vowel, it becomes control R. All those rules he wasn't taught. So
Hmm.
so he would try to memorize it to the best of his ability, and then he would take the test, and then next week it would be it wouldn't be nothing there.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that makes sense now because like I've seen those card set for teaching how to
Mhm.
read and things like that. So now putting a name on it is actually very useful, and that actually make me think of the screen technology that we have at
Mhm.
Dystech. We so basically when we get the age of the individual being screened, we have like a bank of word. I think there's 6,000 word and 6,000 nonsense word but pronounceable,
Mhm.
and um, and so every time someone go through a screening, the word are randomly generated,
Mhm.
and what that does is that because there is also nonsense word, if a dyslexic kid or adult has
Mhm.
already seen a word,
Mhm.
you can use your visual memory
Mhm.
to say, oh, I've seen the word elephant,
Mhm.
and I'm just going to say elephant because I can visualize the word, but it doesn't mean that the individual read it, right?
Mhm.
And so that's actually that's why we have those nonsense words that are still pronounceable because
Yes.
they will have never seen that before, and they will be
Mhm.
forced to try and read.
Yes.
That's a great point. Not many people know that because, like, as
Mhm.
a parent, you can see your kid being able to read like a sentence. You're like, oh
Mhm.
my god, that's working. But the reality is that most of those words they just remember by heart. Like
Yes.
elephant is elephant, elephant, but they're actually not decoding the word itself. And so it's a tricky thing. So based on your work, and you've been working with people around the world, and where do you see your book helping the most? I would assume that school
Mhm.
would be the first people to jump on this and say, hey, we need this. Obviously, it's better to be able to have those books for a large amount of students.
Mhm.
How can school leverage those kind of book and sort of support their student better
Yeah.
in your view?
So it's I would say when we first launched the books, the biggest support came from the schools here in the US that actually teach kids with dyslexia. They knew what they needed, and they knew it wasn't out. And when our books became available, they swallowed them, and they just started using them in very different shapes and formats. A lot of them put them into their curriculum because there is actually a story in there, and we have 20 25 chapters, and up to 9,000 words. There's a really good story there where you can start not just working on reading, but comprehension, analogies, the character building, the plot setting, the scenery. There's so much that can be created as supplemental material around the books. and a few other experts reached out to me, and so now we have, if you look at our online store, now we actually have literature guides. So they look at my books and they look at the words I use. So they could create a comprehension workbook, a writing workbook, and also a phonics workbook, because there are certain sounds that are in that book, and they say these are the ones they need to practice. So they create a lot of phonics worksheets around those as well.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So there's a lot of things that can go around those books to sort of support a child throughout their curriculum year and things like that. What about parents? Are
So,
parent also,
yes.
because I was, it's unless you're aware and
Mhm.
you're doing your research as a parent, such as what you did, my child is struggling. I
Mhm.
want to learn more. Unless you actually stumble upon decodable book and what they
Mhm.
are and how they work, it would be quite hard for parents to actually get a grip of those things, right? Or how do you see this throughout Simple Words book? Do you actually have a lot of parents also using that? And how do you see the awareness for parent to be aware that this thing exists and it can potentially support your kid?
So it's very hard, I think, for parents to understand what decodable books are, what's the use of this, and why they're written a certain way. But I think working with tutors and schools and parents all together, we've seen a great success with parents as well. Just imagine, you have a child who brings a book from school, and they say, I
Mm,
want to read this, and it's our book. And then they said, how can I find this book again? And are there more books like this? So when they go to our website, they might come home with one book, but when they see that there are a whole series of other books, then that kind of opens up their vision on that. Okay, there are other things that maybe we can provide to my child that they can actually are able to read. And what I have seen is parents are such big advocates. If a parent likes
mm,
something, then the word of mouth goes around like crazy. It's
mm,
so the parents are, I think, our, like the boots on the ground, and they spread the
mm,
word. And they, if they find the books before the teachers, then they go and make sure the teachers and the administration at the school district get the books. So it's, I think it
mm.
goes, hand in hand. But initially, I would say schools were the first ones that picked it up. But
Yeah.
once now that the brand is out there and the parents are understanding, and there are also
Mm,
reviews there that said this is the first book my child read without crying. They didn't want to stop reading. We were saying, stop reading, it's time for dinner, and they didn't want to close the book. I mean, that's
yeah.
almost unheard of for a lot of these kids and a lot of parents. When they read it, they feel the pain that that child had, because that's what they live day in day out, and they say maybe buy one book and see if this is something that our child would benefit from.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
so many people resonate with that story. What that trigger point is, a child who is struggling to read, frustrated, mostly crying because they have to read 20 minutes a day,
Mm,
and
mm,
they can't, or they're in a classroom and all their peers are picking up chapter books during silent time, and they pick up a book and they act like they're reading, because the big books that they actually can read are baby books, and they're embarrassed
yeah,
to sit
yeah,
next to their friends and pick up those books. And then when it's time to, say a few words about what you read, it's usually either they get into trouble or they want to go and get a drink of water. They find excuses to leave the classroom, and
yeah,
that's not a healthy mental state. So our goal is to really bring this whole thing together, and it's all about, again, building that confidence in each child, because
mm,
no matter, if they're reading well or not, everything comes together when you're an adult, right? As you know, you could struggle all your life in school, but when you're adult, there's so many ways to be successful, but you still
yeah,
have to
yeah,
believe in yourself, and you have to have that self confidence. And
yeah,
my goal is really to either to build it, or hopefully not even break it. And that child
mm,
who's 3 years old and thinks they're a superhero, they continue that belief throughout
yeah,
academic life. So
yeah. And
that's pretty much all I want.
that's a great, that's inspiring, that's humble, that's,
Mhm.
you know, not many people realize that this is a real thing. You know, when we started the research like a couple of years ago, we collected audio recording. Our goal was to collect audio recording from children who were struggling reader, dyslexic and non-dyslexic. And so, you know, all the data that we've collected are completely de-identified, and we were listening to each one of them because we had to put some annotation in order to train our algorithm. And you know, I actually collected a lot of data myself with, you know, the child next to me, and you know, recording their voice. And you know, when sometimes when you listen those poor kids trying to read, you know, it's just heartbreaking, right? You know, they're just innocent people, innocent kid, and they're full of joy. They're completely innocent. They don't know anything about life. They just love being what they are. And you know, when they're confronted to, you know, reading, and you listen to this afterwards, you know, when with the team, it was really tough.
Mhm.
You know, there is a real problem, and I think what you're doing is great. And you know, we need more awareness. We need more people like you
Mhm.
who try and build confidence, because that's really what, you know, that's really what empower the kids to move forward. And so, talking about you know, awareness, where can people find you? I'm sure that you've mentioned before we went on the show, we had a quick chat. You've mentioned that you were in a process of, I think, discussing with a New Zealand partnership to be able to ship your book
Yes.
in the Asia Pacific as well. So where can people find you? Where can parent and then school principal or teacher find you, Cigdem?
So the easiest way to reach us is on our website. It's simplewordsbooks.com. There are places where you can, contact us, and I read every single email that comes in. And you can buy the books on our website. We ship all around the world, and I offer free author autography on my website, because I know that for most of the kids, these will be the first books they ever read. And I feel
Mm,
like having the author of the book signing them with their name and an encouraging message makes it that much easier for them to open and start reading that first chapter. And most of the the barriers are in that first chapter, right? They don't want to open it. Oh, I don't want to read, I don't like to read. But I feel like if we can do anything we can to get them to open the book and sit down and read a few pages, then I think the rest comes relatively easier, because now they feel like they're empowered and they feel like they can accomplish reading. We have a partner now in New Zealand. I believe they're expanding into Australia, and they currently do ship to Australia. If you want to get the books cheaper, because it is expensive to ship from US all the way to New Zealand and Australia, you can get it for a lot less through them. And it's called Switch Learning and Z like New Zealand.com. And we are also available on Amazon. You can get the digital copies as well.
mm.
And you can go to our website, and you have the links for the digital copies as well.
Amazing, amazing. Look, Cigdem, thank you so much for being here. It was amazing talking to you. It was amazing hearing about your story as a mom, from business owner, from helping other kids now. I think there's a lot to learn from this. And thank you so much for taking the time to having a chat.
Thank you so
Look
much for
forward
having
to.
me. Yeah.
No worries. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.